Welcome to another Artis Opus tutorial. We are back on metallics. Your dry brush needs you. So he turned out really, really nicely. This is our model we're doing today. Very simple techniques, but I would say probably some advanced tips in here. I've got some really kind of little nifty things that I do to promote coherency across a model or to get the most out of metallics and dry brushing in general. So please like it if you like it. Please comment, please subscribe. Let us know what you'd like to see next. I've not done infantry for a while, so it's nice to kind of return to them. And without further ado, let's jump in. I've hit this with a thin layer of Monitorum varnish. So you can use any varnish you like. The idea is we're just going to give ourselves a slightly smoother base coat. It's optional, you know, if you think you've got a really smooth base coat anyway, that's fine. But what I want to do is give the smoothest possible surface to put our metallics on, and that should help them look super shiny basically. For our base coat, you can do this with dry brush, with normal brush, or with airbrush. Literally doesn't matter. I'm going to show you it with Series D. We're going to be mixing a little bit of three of my favorite colors. So we've got Game Air Silver, Model Color Black, and then I've actually got a little dot of Doomball Brown from Games Workshop here. And the reason for that is I'm going to go for a warm paint job on this, and I want my metallics to have a, you know, like a warm hue to them. So it's only going to be a touch of the other colors. They are quite strong. And then I'm just going to put this on in careful thin layers. And I'm basically going to be doing this with wiping. This has got such good coverage that I don't have to worry particularly about the pattern of my strokes. The only thing to be concerned about is that we don't want things to be too thick. So that's where our dampening pad can come in, doing it with Series D. Obviously, if you're layering it, then just use more water. And if you're airbrushing it, just use more thinner. Now, if you do this with buffing, dry brushing, one of the huge pluses of that, rather than kind of smushing it right in like I did in the first step, is that you will maintain details with black lining. I've got really good coverage everywhere I want. And then some of the places where it's good to not have coverage, like those lines in the backpack, look how clean that has come out. So if you are using Series D, I really would recommend buffing. And you can't get this with the airbrush or with the brush with that degree of convenience. You can if you're really careful around the edges and stuff, but that's one of the huge plus sides of doing it with this. I'm using a medium, which is slightly smaller than I normally use, and it's because I'm going for a kind of high quality base coat, and I want the level of control that I've got from the smaller brush. Once I'm really sure that my brush is behaving exactly how I want it, that's the point when I will go to the head and buff this up. I don't want to get it at a stage where my brush is, you know, like super, super heavy with paint or anything like that. That coverage, it's a joke, isn't it? Super fast, super convenient, and we've even maintained some of that detail that we'll be looking to kind of reinforce with the washing stages. So this step definitely is only for dry brushing. We are going to continue with that kind of buffing style, and basically we're just going to be moving through to a purer and purer silver. So I'm just going to take a higher proportion of the silver, still a little bit of the brown, still a tiny bit of the black, and remove the excess. And then very carefully, I'm going to start on the gun because I'm probably going to put some other colors on that anyway in case I screw up. And then once I'm cool with that, we're just gently going to buff the entire thing up. Now I'm using a lighter pressure than I was for the base coating, and I'm going to use my patience as well. So this entire thing is going to be done in a couple of steps. Make sure that your paint isn't too thick or anything like that. And make sure that you don't have too much of it on the brush. Do test it somewhere else, on your finger, on your texture palette, before taking it to the miniature. And as I said, for the subsequent stages, it's just a matter of going through to a purer silver. So, tiny bit of the brown in there, just to make sure that it remains slightly warm. None of the black. And then we're really going to make sure that this doesn't have too much on it for buffing this up. Now it's up to you. I'm doing this pretty much entirely texture based, but if you wanted to pick certain areas and have them as, you know, like specifically highlighted as per your choosing, not just by texture by the model, then what you could do is stip a little bit. Let's say we're going up the back of these calves. You could stip a little bit here and then dry brush. And you could do that in the first steps when you had more paint on the brush. I'm just going for purely texture based on this though. It's going to be kind of traditional. If it's at the edges, it's going to be brighter, and if it's in the recesses, it's going to be darker. Okay, for a wash, I'm actually using the base Requiem Flesh shade. Now you can use Sepia or, you know, Devil and Mud or anything like that. I'm choosing this number 1 because it's weak and I'm just mainly looking for a body, but number 2 because it's got a slight pinky hue to it. And then in that I've mixed a little bit of our brown. I'll add a little bit more than that actually. A little bit of our brown and a little bit of our black. Now the black is very, very strong, so make sure it doesn't overpower things. And then what I'm going to be doing is giving a thin wash to the entire piece. Now, the most important part of this is the recesses, so that's where I'm going to be making sure that it's pulled, and I'll do that by, if I'm doing a large panel like this, I'll start in the middle of the panel and I will end my strokes in the recesses. That will both ensure that you get a smooth coverage on the panel and you'll get a darker point in the recesses, and basically you won't make any mistakes by using that. I'm using a size 4 here, which is a perfect brush for this type of task, holds a lot of paint. So no need whatsoever to switch to a smaller brush for the head. I don't believe in that type of thing, not for a wash at any rate. I'm more concerned that I'm using a brush here that's going to hold a lot of our wash. I don't have to go for, you know, more trips back to the palette or anything like that. So I'm just using the tip, and as we have all over the rest of the model, what really matters is that you use that lift off point there and you deposit the most of your wash in the recesses and the least on the flat areas. All right, so that is beginning to look pretty snazzy. We have a couple of problem areas here. I've got a drift of the wash running down here and, you know, a couple of little blemishes. The lovely thing about this not being the last stage is that none of these should matter whatsoever. Also, that previous wash, if you know you wanted to do that blue tinted or anything, or use a drop of contrast in there or anything like that, you can pick whatever color you want and apply all the same principles that I've used to kind of keep this guy in the warm, rusty-ish silver spectrum. Now, okay, for the highlighting. So I'm just going to be using pure silver here and really, really, really carefully. I want a small amount on my brush, and we're going for a soft effect and a soft touch, and we're using a smaller brush. So I'm using a small here, and then taking those principles from the buffing and applying them really gently. As I always say, if you want to be more gentle, just go further away from the front of the brush. So I'm gripping it by the fattest bit on this small. If you were using a medium, you could be gripping it just behind the ferrule or something like that. And then we're literally gonna tickle those highlights into existence all over the model. And because this is our final highlight color, I've not darkened this down to any degree. This is the brighter silver that we've got on the model. So it's just a matter of doing this to whatever degree you want. You know, that could be enough for you, where I've gone to there. That could be absolutely fine. That could be too much, or it could be not enough. So it's not enough for me, so I'm going to keep going. And essentially, I'll just keep going, remembering to catch all the aspects of the model that I want. You can choose to not catch the undersides if you want to make them look darker, you know, underneath and brighter on top. And one way to do that is to start on the top sections, because that's when your paint will be the heaviest. Obviously, always be careful. But start on the top sections. You can either do it on this rounded bit of the backpack, start on the top, and then once you've got less paint and you've gone over all the top sections of your model, you can do exactly the same thing and you do it on the lower sections. And obviously when you've got less paint on your brush, less will be leaving, so it's a very good way to get an extremely organic kind of global highlighting effect where it's lighter on the bits that are facing upwards. All right, so I've just been doing a fair bit of blocking in here. The majority of it I've done with a mix somewhere between Nuln Oil and the black from Vallejo we've got. So if you have a look at the consistency here, it's not too thick, and then I just use it as many times as I like. So on the kind of rubber trunking between the legs, I've just filled it in a couple of times like that. Use the same a bit more carefully because I've kept the skull insignia on there, the wing skull, on the black sections of this, and then the shoulder pads I've just painted a flat black. What I did want to show you was the color that I'm using on the squiggles on the purity seals. So you'll have seen me do this before with tattoos on the gargant and stuff like that, but it's very easy for things to look a little bit worse than they should do if you use pure black when you shouldn't. So what I'm going to do here is take some of our Doom Ball, which is obviously a color we've got elsewhere on the model, and I'm going to mix that with a bit of the black, and that's going to make a real difference in terms of, you know, the text looking a bit unnatural. And obviously it's meant to be done with ink or whatever, and it'd probably look okay if we did, but I think it's going to look a little bit better on the model if we can have it as a dark brown in the circumstance. So I'm just going to be putting some little squiggles on here. Not particularly my speciality as a painter, but they'll look okay. There we go. So that colouring there, I think looks far better than a black. I actually started off with a black and it looked awful, so that's why I went for the black and brown mix. I'm wanting to put a little bit of gold on the model, so wanting to keep the effort that we've put into the dry brushing of the silver all over, I've got some Iyanden yellow contrast here, and I'm going to thin it down with a fair bit of water. This is going to be a glaze. I'm not using this like a wash. It's not there to drift into the recesses. I just want it to filter over our silver and turn it gold. I've done the black all around it, but if anywhere slips, I can always put another coat of black on the surrounding area. Then it might take a couple of coats, but I'm just going to do a couple of thin glazes, and that should bring it up to be a really, really warm yellow gold. So I've done a second coat of the contrast, and I've actually mixed a little bit of Screamer Pink of all colours into it because I want to use it elsewhere on the model. I think I'm going to use it on the base along with a little bit of green. So I'm now going to try and introduce those colours, however subtly, on the model. So obvious places that you can introduce other colours quite easily, even if it's like a blue wash or something, you can introduce it into parts of your purity seals or the little light section that you're meant to have here that James always reminds me about. So I think it's a really nice thing to kind of echo stuff up and down your model. So any excuse I've got to involve something else in a wash, I really like that type of thing, particularly mixing paints in with washes. Like I said, any excuse for introducing those colours is a good one. So you're going to get a little bit of this Screamer Pink and use that extremely carefully on the eyes. I've base coated these with a white just to make whatever I put on it a little bit brighter. Okay, so I've mixed Doom Ball, which we've used previously, and the Screamer Pink that we've managed to start introducing over the model on the eyes and on the insignia. So I guess we call that Screaming Ball. Sounds like a Comanche chief or something. That is the base coat for the base of the miniature. For the little light on his leg, hopefully you can see, I've just literally dropped a little bit of watered down white in there, and then I've got the contrast paint Warp Lightning. I'm going to water that down a little bit too. Drop that in, and then once that's dried, I will drop in Moot Green for a properly punchy, you know, little glow within that. So I've popped the head off its stick, which was a real mistake because now my access to it is not as good as it was. So I've popped it on something else where I can get some good angles. That is from me trying to get to the good bit of fluorescent paints, which are notoriously thick and goopy and need a lot of shaking, and we didn't quite manage to get there. And this is where we are with the model. So I've given some detail to the base, a little bit of lichen, and what I'm going to do now is just do some very, very quick work highlighting that helmet. So we've got the same silver that we've used elsewhere. I've got a pretty wet brush. I've taken a load of it off. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold it under my light at the angle that I want to reflect. Remember that. And then I'm basically just going to fill in those areas. There, now hopefully you've got little enough on your brush that nothing you do is going to look crazy extreme. And it's up to you whether you want to edge highlight some of it, so you could get the front of his mask or stuff like that. You could highlight under the eyes, take out any areas you want, the top of his mohawk bit, that type of thing. It's the same things that I say when we're doing washing. It's important for me to end my stroke where I want it to be the brightest. And if you want to use a more dilute bit of your brush, it's an angle where you can do it, then you can use it closer to the base where there's not quite as much in terms of pigments. So after blocking in these bits, I'm just going to dilute it even further. And then I'm going to smudge into those sections. Push it towards the edges and soften it a bit. So just going to make sure that the head stands out a little bit more in comparison to the rest of the model. My transfer application is not very good, so one of my things that I tend to do is I really consider whether I should be painting over them or not, and that just helps kind of smooth out their finish and stuff like that. So I've gone around the edges of this transfer with black, and now I'm just basically filling it in with white. And then I might even varnish over this, but this is just a way to ensure that it looks not like it's a transfer, looks like it's painted on. Really love how metallics look when they're reflecting, you know, just the lighting and whatever natural situation they're in. Not quite sure if I'd say the basing was successful on this one. It's try something different, but maybe something conventional, you know, like a warm brown to go with it, or even a cool dark base to contrast would have looked really nice. We've done that a few times on our infantry in the past. If you want to check out a tutorial with kind of an airbrushed version of infantry with metallics, then do check out Fauxhammer's recent video. Pretty sick there, and he's also got some nifty Series D techniques, which I can't wait to try out myself. Any suggestions or questions, let me know. And as I always say with our tutorials, I'm trying to give you a set of tools and rules for you to be able to apply, and just don't worry about the paint. So if you want to swap out the silver for a gold, you want to swap out the warm browns for cool blues, or drop a purple in, or tint it green, or anything like that, it's, you know, it's exactly the same set of rules. Just swap out the colors and you'll get comparable results, but with a different finish. So yeah, any questions about that type of thing, do pop them below. Any requests for future tutorials, let us know. Please like, comment and subscribe, and we will catch you in the next video.